Hi everybody, this is Brian at 3dmetaltools.com. Hey, I thought I'd put together a quick review and building tip video for this Piececool SUV off-road vehicle. This is one of my favorites that I've put together in quite a while. The level of detail with this, you know, it's probably, it's certainly within the same range as what Metal Earth calls their Iconics versions. Now, of course, Piececool and Metal Earth and Tenyo are the same companies. But I'm not aware of Piececool really having, you know, distinctions between their lines based on complexity. So I think I would say that this is more along the lines of the equivalent of Metal Earth's Iconics line, because the level of detail here is amazing. The you know, the seats, the seat backs, the armrests, I believe what's a cup holder, gear shift, pedals, the steering wheel is an assembly made up of 4 or 5 pieces, the floodlights up on top, there's a gearbox, transmission, suspension struts, and of course all those beautiful treads. There's so many cool details in this model that I highly recommend it. It was absolutely one of my favorites to do, and I had such a blast building this model. So the instructions, typical of Metal Earth, Piececool, Tenyo, they're all very easy to understand. I don't know that I would call this a beginner model, but at the same time, boy, my opinion is that a lot of times what frustrates beginners more than anything isn't necessarily the complexity of the model, because if you have the right tools and if you have patience and a little know-how, then I think that even a beginner can put together a very complex model. The biggest pitfall is when you get models that don't have good instructions, and you know, Piececool, Metal Earth, Tenyo, they always have really good instructions, and this is no exception as well. So let me go ahead and get into some of the details of this build, which, like I said, I absolutely loved it. So as far as tips, the first thing that I would have everybody take a look at here are these fenders. So the fenders that are attaching around here. Obviously there's 4 of them, and there's a small detail here that is important to note. So on part number 16, please notice that the tapered end, so this end is more square, this end is more tapered. The tapered end goes to the front, and the non-tapered end goes to the back. Then part 18, the tapered end is the back, and the non-tapered end is the front. Then when you get to the portion of where you're going to build the other fenders, the 2 others, again, pay special attention, because the back of the fender is the tapered portion on part 16, and again, the front is the tapered portion on part 18. So that's one area that when I was first building this, I thought, boy, that could be a quick pitfall if somebody's not paying attention to which way those need to go, and they wouldn't fit correctly if you got those reverse. The next thing that I would go into is, you can see the portions here for constructing the seats, and like I said, the details on these seats are awesome. You've got these armrests that come together, attach here, you got this headrest, the whole seat assembly comes together. It really is amazing. However, I did make a mistake in the process of when I put the headrest on. I would highly recommend do exactly what they say. Put the headrest on to the back of the seat before you put the seat, the cushion part of the seat, into the rest of the seat. So I built this seat, then I put the headrests on, and I think you can tell that the only way to access that is from underneath. Now, thank goodness I have a set of needle nose pliers with very, very small tips. I was able to get up inside there and grab those just barely. I think I was lucky I had this tool on hand. My typical locking forceps, I think you can see that they really, well, they are still very good for getting into tight areas, but not nearly as nice as these Tronics needle nose pliers with very small tips. So there's definitely a difference there between these. But then again, you may not need them at all if you don't make the same mistake that I did. But if I didn't have these pliers with these teeny tiny tips and the long reach, then I'm not sure how I would have fixed this without completely disassembling the seat. And of course, I hate doing that because the more you bend tabs, the more you twist tabs, the more chance there are of breaking them. And so I was glad that I was able to fix that, but avoid that pitfall when you build this. When you get to parts 76, 72, 79, and 80, those are the axles. And it's very important to make a note of which way here. I'm sorry, here's part 72, and then here's part 76. It's very important to pay attention to this right here where you have, okay, you're going to bend these tabs. I'm going to zoom way in. Oh wait, I can't zoom in anymore. That's the limit of my lens. So you have these tabs that need to be bent upward, okay? And you need to make sure that when you do that, that those tabs are in the upper right quadrant. So here, upper right when you bend those up. And then with part number 76, make sure that these tabs are in the lower right quadrant when you bend them up. Then with part number 79, make sure that these are in the upper left quadrant when you bend them up. And then part number 80, make sure that you are in the lower left quadrant when you bend those up. I didn't make any mistakes with this, but I could see this being something that you could quickly not realize that you did wrong. And of course, all four of these are very distinct parts, and if you didn't get these right, you might be fumbling around to figure out, oh my gosh, which part was number 70 and which one was number 80 because I did this wrong and now I got to figure this out again. So pay special attention to those tabs and which way they're supposed to go and which quadrant they're going to be in when you make the upward bend. So next, part number 84. Part number 84, these are basically the tires themselves. So you're going to take this part and you're going to bend it into a circle, and then you will attach the tire treads and the rims and everything else to this portion of the tire. I would highly recommend, what you need to do is you need to take these two tabs here and insert them into these two slots after you form this into a circle. I would highly recommend that you bend these tabs downward, or in other words, inside the tire. So when you assemble this, it might be tempting to bend these upwards because it might be easier to make the assembly. I would really recommend you bend them downwards. That way they will be hidden. They'll be inside the tire. They won't be sticking out of the tire, and they won't get in the way of these treads when you need to bend these treads down onto the tire. So you want these to be invisible, so you bend them inside, and you don't want them to get in the way of the tread. So obviously bend them inside. One thing that I would recommend is that when you build this model, obviously you're going to have a choice as to where you're going to put the seam that I just mentioned here, okay? Decide where that seam needs to go, where it's going to look best. I think you can see that right here, if my camera is getting this detail well enough, I put the seam here on the bottom. So underneath these two treads, there's that seam, and it's very difficult to see, but if I put it on the front, then when you're looking at this model, it might be visible. Instead, I put it on the bottom so that when this model is displayed, you're not going to see that seam in the tire. You're only going to see, you know, the continuous metal sheet. And the same thing with all four other tires. Put them I chose the bottom. I suppose you could put them in the top if you wanted, because it would be very difficult to see underneath that fender, but I definitely wouldn't put them on the front or the back of the tire, because then they would be kind of painfully visible, and I'm not sure that I would think that that's a good idea. So consider where you want those seams to be when you mount the tires to the axles. okay, so the next thing that I would mention is going to be these wheels. So the wheels, you're going to have, I believe, in the end, you're going to have, well, 4 of these A parts and 4 of these B parts, and then you're going to have 4 of these C parts and 4 of these D parts. And these are all sub-assemblies that after you build them, you set aside. And then once you come back, so this is the A sub-assembly, the B sub-assembly, the C sub-assembly, and the D sub-assembly on these tires. I would highly recommend that you find a spot on your bench and maybe label A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, and set them there. Because if you get these mixed up and you don't have them in the right spot, then you could mount the treads with the diagonals going in the wrong direction so that they're not uniform. You know, if you put these in wrong, then you could have this tread making a V in the opposite direction than what it is. So just, I mean, I have these, knolling boards, you know, with a numbered grid. You know, that's easy for me to set parts aside into a specified numbered grid so I know where they are. But I really recommend that you take these wheel sub-assemblies and be very careful with where you put them. Make sure that you have something labeled A, B, C, or D, or whatever it needs to make sure that those don't get messed up. Because it would get pretty confusing to take all those parts later and not have them well organized and try and figure out where each one is supposed to go. The one thing that I wasn't sure of is that when you build the chassis, you have these, 1, 2, 3, 4 suspension struts. Okay, so once you attach the chassis to the top of the Jeep, then later you're going to attach this to the axles down here. Okay, so those 4 suspension struts and also these 4 suspension struts that are on the axles, they never define for you exactly what you're supposed to do with them. There's no, and I'll show you on the model. So on the model, it's this long suspension strut, this long suspension strut, this long suspension strut, this, and then of course the shorter ones. So these are attached to the chassis, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 are attached to the axles. They don't tell you what to do with them. Now you can see that, of course, since they're suspension based struts, I bent them so that they, you know, have that appearance that an SUV would have. But I decided to just tuck them underneath the axles. Maybe you could put them on top of the axles if you wanted, but there is no clearly defined instruction as to what you're supposed to do with those other than allow them to fit. So the short suspension struts I tucked under the long suspension struts, and the long suspension struts I tucked under the axle. There's no tabs, there's no, you know, clearly defined instructions as to what you do with this. It just basically says at this part, just basically says to put that on there and then attach the rear wheel and you're done. It doesn't tell you what to do with those. That's what I decided to do. If anybody decides that there's a better or has a different preference on that little spot, then let me know what you think about that, or what your thoughts would be on that. My only critique of this model, and this is very, very minor, is that I think you can see that these treads, while they look awesome, you are trying to bend a piece that is engineered flat onto a piece that is engineered curved. So I hope my camera can pick this up. I'm going to try and get closer in here. But right here, maybe you can see, or if I can pinpoint one of them and get my camera to focus on it, essentially this portion here is straight, as is the bend, going onto a round tire. So that means that these treads simply won't lay flat on the tire. There's a pretty good example if I can focus on it. Right there. You can see how that's not laying flat on the tire because it can't follow the curve of the tire. It's a straight piece and it can't follow the curve of the tire. So I wish, if you look at, I'll need to zoom way in hang on a second. So if they would have engineered these tread pieces So let's take this tiny piece right here. If they would have engineered this edge to be slightly curved, and if they would have engineered these edges on the treads to be slightly curved also, then you would have had a piece engineered round to go over a piece that's engineered round. I think that would have been better, because the treads to me are kind of like the eye catcher of this whole model. You know, the tire treads just look awesome on this. I kind of wish they followed the curve of the tire better than what they do, but that's just a very, very minor critique. So one last thing that I'll mention, and this is really more to do with tooling. One thing that I would really recommend, if you don't own a set, pick up a set of flat nose pliers, and I'll give you an example of where these really shined with this, or shined or shone, I don't know, where these really, really did well for this model. And that is when you need to take all of these individual tread pieces, okay, where can I find a better example? Here. You need to take all these individual tread pieces and go from flat to bending all of them inward at perfect 90 degrees, okay? If you're using tweezers or round nose pliers, it's going to be very difficult to get these all to be perfectly 90 degrees, but that's the beauty of flat nose pliers. That's really where flat nose pliers shine, is that you've got on the edge up here of flat nose pliers, you have this angle is a perfect right angle. And then you have this, the face here is also a perfect right angle. So that means that if I'm going to grab a piece and make a bend, all that I have to do is press it flat against the side of the pliers to make a perfect right angle every time. Or I can grab it from the front, and then when I bend, I can feel the right angle on the front of the pliers, and I'm ensured that it's going to be a perfect 90-degree bend each time. So when I was doing these treads, I was using my jeweler's block here, and I gave each little piece a slight bend, slight bend, slight bend. Then I could go in, and I'll put this on this side because it's easier to see. Then I could go in and take my flat nose pliers and just simply bend until I felt 90 degrees, and done. I know that's 90 degrees. And geez, on each tire, how many of these treads did I have to bend? A heck of a lot. Or I can do the same thing with going this way and then bending in this direction. So that's not, let me show you a practical example. So here, this is just a piece of sprue, and with flat nose pliers, if I wanted to bend this at a perfect right angle, I should probably come out a little bit here. If I want to bend this at a perfect right angle, if I were using tweezers or round chain nose pliers, round nose pliers, it wouldn't be nearly as easy to get a perfect right angle. But in this case, again, I'll go on this angle, I can take this against my jeweler's block and just bend it, and I can feel 90 degrees, okay? So you're not going to be able to see it from this angle very well, but if I take this piece and just do this, I can feel 90 degrees, and I can be very, very sure that the bend that I just created is indeed a good 90-degree angle. Now the other way, that's bending off the tip of the pliers. The other way would be bending off the side of the pliers. Now the side of the pliers, I don't always need to use a jeweler's block. My hands and my fingers will work just as well, because there's a lot of surface area on the side of the pliers to register off of. So if I'm taking this piece and I want to make a perfect 90-degree bend, then I just grab it here, bend it, and I know darn well that it has to be 90 degrees because it registered against the face, all right, against the side of the pliers. If I wanted to do this on the jeweler's block, then yes, absolutely I can. And then by pressing, you can feel when that 90 degrees occurs. So, you know, these are Tronics, these are the higher end, but whether you're using, you know, imported tools, flat nose pliers made the treads on this model so much easier, because you can register a perfect 90 degrees either off of the face of the pliers or a perfect 90 degrees off of the tips of the pliers. And then of course, you know, if you wanted to get into even longer versions of these flat nose pliers, 90-degree bends are probably the most common bend that we have to make as far as an angular bend goes, of course. Maybe not a curve, but you know, the limitation of this is only as far as these pliers will reach. And in this case, the jaws on these pliers are about 1.25 inches. So I can take a full 1.25 inch piece, bend it, and be positive that it's going to be 90 degrees with flat nose pliers. So I will be doing full tutorials on all tools as I get more and more done with 3D metal models. But that's just a quick little tutorial on how flat nose pliers are very useful and how they made this model so much easier with those repetitive tread bends. So I hope this is helpful for everybody. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments. Again, I loved this model. It's easily one of my favorites. I think it turned out fantastic, and it's definitely a favorite of mine in my collection. Thank you so much.